I'm 7 again. Early spring, up in the boughs of the old apple tree of my childhood, a place to float in the clouds of fresh and fragrant white blossoms. Feeling my young body sing with the new-sprung bird song, with my sweet boyness, innocence, that the scent of today's tree takes me half a century back to. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in to the 103rd show in my ongoing weekly series, coming to you live from the fresh-faced coast of Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist, Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more poetically, more expressively, more soulfully. In broadcast 102, we took wing, a gathering of poetry, cultural commentary, and inquiry around all kinds of lifting off, of spreading wings, of things flying and soaring and freeing, liberating lives, beings, dreams, desires. This week, dialing back to the times of our youth, revisiting and reflecting on dimensions of our younger days, childhood, growing up, the joys, jolts, and journeys of being a boy or girl, a budding son, daughter, sibling, school-goer, innocent wanderer, and more. Let's begin with this poem by Ned O'Gorman, Childhood. Childhood is when the mouth tastes earth, when the body is the body's sign, when there is no studied end to time, when hands join and make a cradle. The child races through the snow in circles and hears on the swing the sound of air. The world's grave mummery is everywhere, and the sun like a falcon swerves toward his rest. There are drummers drumming and red sails making April conquests in the bay. The flesh is still a flurried sound of clay. Kites go as high as God, and there are birds. Though children are not passionate, they feel the thigh against the sheet. When there is thunder, they will weep. Stairs go down to halls, and rooms are darknesses. A child is verb and hieroglyphic of his day, and sits and broods like a thinking flame. That is called the playing of the game. A child tends to glory like a pirate in a church, and suffering fills him up with light that holds its lumen for another time. And one day, as he plays, he'll see a sign and lift his arms and cry aloud like man. Thank you, Ned Gorman. Children in a Field by Angela Shaw. They don't wade in so much as they are taken. Deep in the day, in the deep of the field, every current in the grasses whispers, "Hurry, hurry." Every yellow spreads its perfume like a rumor, impelling them further on. It is the way of girls. It is the sway of their dresses in the summer trance light, their bare calves already far gone in green. What songs will they follow? Whatever the wood warbles, whatever storm or harm the border promises, whatever calm. Let them go. Let them go traceless through the high grass and into the willow blur, traceless across the lean blue glint of the river to the long dark bodies of the conifers and over the welcoming threshold of nightfall. Thank you, Angela Shaw. So lovely. I went back to the marginalian for us because I was remembering a story, a very small but big story that the poet Pablo Neruda said on a childhood encounter that he had that taught him a lot about life and writing and why we make art. And it's called The Hand Through the Fence. So it's an early childhood experience that he had. And here it is in his words, because it, as I said, it profoundly influenced not only his poetry, but also his understanding of art and life. One time, investigating in the backyard of our house in Temuco, the tiny objects and minuscule beings of my world, I came upon a hole in one of the boards of the fence. I looked through the hole and saw a landscape like that behind our house, uncared for and wild. I moved back a few steps, because I sensed vaguely that something was about to happen. All of a sudden, a hand appeared, a tiny hand of a boy about my own age. By the time I came close again, the hand was gone, and in its place there was a marvelous white sheep. The sheep's wool was faded. Its wheels had escaped. All of this only made it more authentic. I had never seen such a wonderful sheep. I looked back through the hole, but the boy had disappeared. I went into the house and brought out a treasure of my own, a pine cone, opened, full of odor and resin, which I adored. I set it down in the same spot and went off with the sheep. To feel the intimacy of brothers is a marvelous thing in life. To feel the love of people whom we love is a fire that feeds our life. But to feel the affection that comes from those whom we do not know, from those unknown to us, who are watching over our sleep and solitude, over our dangers and our weaknesses, that is something still greater and more beautiful, because it widens out the boundaries of our being and unites all living things. That exchange brought home to me, for the first time, a precious idea, that all of humanity is somehow together. It won't surprise you, then, that I attempted to give something resiny, earth-like, and fragrant in exchange for human brotherhood. Just as I once left the pine cone by the fence, I have since left my words on the door of so many people who were unknown to me, people in prison or hunted or alone. This exchange of gifts, mysterious, settled deep inside me like a sedimentary deposit. Love that story. Maybe you do too now. A poem by Rebecca Masieski, taking apart my childhood piano. My mother and I sit on the back porch, bare feet in summer grass, as we take the upright down to pieces, breeze humming through its strings. I extract each melodic tooth and sort them in octaves for rinsing, tidy enclosure in boxes, remembering in each how my young fingers rioted over them, searching for sound, and the way it grows like its own unruly animal. The old piano lies open to Sunday morning sun, swallowing blossoms that drift over like stars from the apple tree I climbed as a girl. My mother and I sit here in a quiet, usually reserved for churches, hands moving slowly over what we gather, piles of soft hammers, odd coils of wire. We take up wet rags and wash each wooden key down to its surface, wet music pooling onto our skin. Thank you, Rebecca, for that poem. Here's one I wrote for a boy of 8 on his birthday, for a young fellow named Ellis, a nipper named Ellis Erickson. It's called a double E day. The day when everything pairs, from your socks and shoelaces to your pencils and the hands on all the clock faces. When everything matches, from the bird song in the park to the boy song in your heart. When everything echoes, like you, and the one and only you see, smiling back in the mirror. Daughters, 1900, by Marilyn Nelson. 5 daughters, in the slant light on the porch, are bickering. The eldest has come home with new truths she can hardly wait to teach. She lectures them. The younger daughters search the sky, elbow each other's ribs, and groan. 5 daughters in the slant light on the porch and blue-sprigged dresses, like a stand of birch saplings whose leaves are going yellow-brown with new truths. They can hardly wait to teach themselves to be called ma'am, to march high-heeled across the hanging bridge to town. 5 daughters in the slant light on the porch. Pomp lowers his paper for a while to watch the beauties he's begotten with his Anne. These new truths they can hardly wait to teach. The eldest sniffs, "A lady doesn't scratch." The third snorts back, "Knock, knock, nobody home." The fourth concedes, "Well, maybe not in church." 5 daughters in the slant light on the porch. Thank you, Marilyn Nelson. The Little Kingdom is a poem I composed back in 2000 in London for my dear goddaughter and her sister, Axel and Camille, where they were living at the time. The Little Kingdom. Out the low ferry door and just past the waterfall of party-colored ivy, a piece of lace, a red-painted palm of Chinese maple, and gold leaf after gold leaf shining on the green moss and gilding the gray slate in this matchbox garden that's filling with fall, and the sound of 2 young girls gathering treasures from the grounds of their little kingdom. I will. They're more grown up now, but I'm going to tell them I shared that. Maybe if they're not leaning in now, they'll lean in sometime. A poem inspired by the story of a Midwest friend about his childhood. He told me several, and I wrote poems for several of them, and this is one of my favorites, and maybe his. It's called The Hop-Along Kid, for Paul Wayner. One midwesterly winter, back in time, but fresh in mind, when you were on the loose and weren't selling boxes of spud nuts from a wire basket for Mrs. Townsend, you found yourself in town, looking wide-eyed through the window of Levitt's jewelry store, where, past the reflections of passing car lights, a Santa Claus was making merry. But standing, alone at dusk, gloveless and shivering, in an oversized overcoat, while the Wichita wind whistled up your sleeves, your eyes weren't fixed on old Kris Kringle. Instead, you beheld the most beautiful young lady you had ever seen, brunetely radiant, who saw you too, who soon floated out from the warmth and sparkle, scooped you up next door to Butyl's to buy you a hat and gloves, and let you pick whatever your 7-year-old heart desired. You passed up the pairs of Beau Brummely pigskins and fancy rabbit furs for the straight shooters, the hop-along Cassidy ones with the cuffs and cowboy fringe, feeling less chillier and much happier as you hopped along back home. Lillian and Mary. This is a piece I've read on a couple of other broadcasts that were apropos then, but here again, in a way, about my big, enduring memory as a little boy. A 5-year-old hand holding a 65-year-old hand a lifetime ago, standing at the open mouth of the mammoth Grand Salon of the soon-to-sail ocean liner she was steaming away on in a cloud of confetti, maybe to England or France. The itinerary no longer remains or matters. Just that moment when I stood at the edge of another age, with 2 proud old ladies. My grandmother Lillian, with her calico cat-soft voice and mink stole, and the Queen Mary, with her stout red lipstick stacks, preparing to cross the Atlantic together, and a little camel-capped and coated boy floating there, with his mother somewhere behind the scene, for a bon voyage. Lillian and Mary. Well, dear listeners, I sometimes do and now have some questions for you about your youth. What did you love most about it? About being a kid or any part of your youth, younger years, younger days? What really excited you back in time? What scared you? What's the best memory you have of growing up? What, as an adult, makes you feel like a child at heart again? Takes you back to that sweet place, that sweet spot of being? Because I think no matter what our childhoods were, I hope there were, if not many, enough sweet spots. What's the most important thing you learned as a child? or realize since had a profound effect on your life, now or since? And what would it be like to bring an innocent I to each day of life? What if we pause to think about the natural artistry of children when they're entirely free and unsquelched and see the world without filters or blinders? Well, I came across this book another time, but I found another note about it, was The Iridescence of Birds. It's a book about Henri Matisse, the painter, by Patricia McLachlan and the illustrator Hadley Hooper. And it tells a heartening story of young Henri's childhood and how it shaped his artistic path long before he began painting. How his mother, in an attempt to brighten the drab and sunless days, put bright red rugs on the floors and painted colorful plates to hang on the walls, letting him mix the paints. How his father gave him pigeons whose iridescent plumage he observed with endless fascination, and how the beautiful silks woven by the townspeople beguiled him with their bright patterns. Lovely book, The Iridescence of Birds. And then I knew the French poet Charles Baudelaire had spoken of the nature of children, and I found this excerpt from The Painter of Modern Life and Other Essays. The child sees everything in a state of newness. He is always drunk. Nothing more resembles what we call inspiration than the delight with which a small child absorbs form and color. Inspiration has something in common with a convulsion, and that every sublime thought is accompanied by a more or less violent nervous shock, which has its repercussion in the very core of the brain. The man of genius has sound nerves, while those of a child are weak. With the one, reason has taken up a considerable position. With the other, sensibility is almost the whole being. But genius is nothing more nor less than childhood recovered at will. A childhood now equipped for self-expression with manhood's capacities and a power of analysis which enables it to order the mass of raw material which it has involuntarily accumulated. And the great artist is one who is never for a moment without the genius of childhood, for which no aspect of life has become stale. Master of that only too difficult art, sensitive spirits will understand me, of being sincere without being absurd. Thank you, Baudelaire. I'd like to have more of a conversation. If he was around, I could talk to him. We could get back in a time machine or conjure him up. Made me think of this poem, Kathleen Fraser's poem. A child drowns in the sea of its own imagining. No, taller than the grass, she swims in a sea that is wet and green behind the house where nothing moves but the wash. It is Monday. The only noise is of bees spinning webs in the sky, and she's sitting bare with her skin pressed green to the ground. Faint shapes of pigeons fling through her eyes, and a dream of fine ladies bathing. The idea in her head is to swim, an instinct of pushing drawers down and of skirts spread over the sea. Oh, coolness of legs, oh, lettuce and clover morning. There are waves of dew on the lawn, and my mother is coming. My mother is coming to chase the sea with a towel. She shakes questions all over the grass. Thank you, Kathleen Fraser. And next sharing is from the book Century of the Child, Growing by Design, 1900 to 2000 by Juliet Kinchin. It now seems as urgent to drastically shift our conception of education and modern design as it did in 1900. What is necessary for this to happen is a new generation equipped with new ways of thinking. The need to foster the young child's innate capacity for divergent thinking, the ability to come up with lots of different answers, brings us back to the early 20th century pioneers of the kindergarten movement and the concept of open-ended play as a strategy for learning and design innovation. If there's one lesson that adults should learn from children, it is that at a time of environmental and economic crisis, Play is a crucial point of connection to the physical and imaginative world. We need to give ourselves time and space for play, space in which the unpredictable can happen. Thank you for that, Juliet Kinchin, Century of the Child, Growing by Design. David Thoreau said, youth gets together with their materials to build a bridge to the moon or maybe a palace on earth. Then in middle age they decide to build a woodshed with them instead. Well, my friends, shall we forego the woodsheds and build instead more marvelous things with our imaginations and our inherent senses of wonder and all possibility? I would recommend we do. A time to begin again. This is a piece I wrote as a gift and honoring of my soul sister, Rachel Menard, in San Francisco, and wrote this back in 2009 on her then 40th birthday. And yet to me it speaks to how we can come to each passage of our life with a great youthfulness. A time to begin again. 1969, the year of women in love, hair, midnight cowboys. Duke Ellington still swinging at 70, and Judy Garland disappearing over a rainbow. The year of Armstrong's star-spangled moonwalk and 300,000 letting it all hang out at Woodstock. The year of Mailer's Pulitzer and Welk's Wurlitzer. Of grown ladies donning trousers in large numbers. The year when Rupert Murdoch, rising Baron of Oz, bought the news, and Russia's Venera 5 rocketed off toward Venus, while Led Zeppelin 1 floated metallically onto the charts. The year an artificial heart took a miraculous beat, and Javier Bardem and Cate Blanchett became sexy babes in Spain and Britain. 1969, the year of you. That year of first breath, of virgin sight, taste, touch, and pure summer swan song light. Maybe every year or decade each of us can begin again, as you in your already wise soul will in this, to see with an innocent eye and feel with an innocent heart the wonder and color of the world, and bring to it the rays of your own first and purest selves. Helen Keller said it is not possible for civilization to flow backwards while there is youth in the world. Speaking of new beginnings, I felt piece of ice in there. I need a little ice water tonight. I felt we ought to go back a bit more, not just to childhood, but to birth and infancy, and from a few different lenses. So here's Oliver de la Paz. At the time of my birth, I wondered how long I could go on once the rain had stopped. My nerves were wedged like wings under a hat. Corn cobs bobbed in boiling water. I kept a fist in my mouth. I was strident. The neat house curved like a draining sink. Hot cars shined outside. Their engines snapped like a chamois. I never wanted to leave. The streets were suet thick. The hucksters had tinny voices. They had swollen drums. They had gravel underfoot and tongues that could peel citrus. Radios throbbed. The wet hush of my breath flung itself to mother. The soft, dark skin. The sweet curl of the arm. The hum. Thank you, Oliver de la Paz. The Number of Grace is a cake-frosted piece of mine for a 1-year-old on her first birthday. And I say for all those becoming one around the country and the world, or who will become one. Those budding out into being. The number of grace is an angel number. A green light from the angels. to realize all your dreams, big, small, and in between, is the number of all beginnings, of fresh starts as you begin opening like a wild flower into the garden of the world. As you're becoming a walking and talking, laughing and loving being, graced with all the gifts of life you need to become one at home in yourself, one truly and peacefully, wisely and playfully at one with the great universe swirling and shining daily around you. The number of grace. Only Child by D. Nurksi. I cradled my newborn daughter and felt the heartbeat pull me out of shock. She didn't know what her hands were. She folded them. I asked her, was there a place where there was no world? She didn't know what a voice was. Her lips were the shape of a nipple. In the park, the child says, watch me. It will not count unless you see. And she shows me the cartwheel, the skip, the rumble, the tricks performed at leisure in midair, each unknown until it is finished. At home she orders, see me eat. I watch her curl on herself, sleep. As I try to leave the dark room, her dreaming voice commands me, watch. Always we pass the seesaw on the way to the swings, but tonight I remember the principle of the lever. I sit the child at one end, I sit near the center, the fulcrum. At once she has power to lift me off the earth and keep me suspended by her tiny weight, she laughing, I stunned at the power of the formula. Thank you, D. Nurksi. Sophie Jewett, Jewett, has this tender poem. And as a mother, you may greatly relate. It's called To a Child. It's from 1910. The leaves talked in the twilight, dear. Hearken the tale they told, how in some far-off place and year, before the world grew old, I was a dreaming forest tree, you were a wild, sweet bird who sheltered at the heart of me because the north wind stirred. How, when the chiding gale was still, when peace fell soft on fear, you stayed one golden hour to fill my dream with singing, dear. Tonight, the self-same songs are sung, the first green forest heard. My heart and the gray world grow young to shelter you, my bird. Thank you, Sophie Jewett. Rachel Sherwood's poem, Names of Children. In early morning, when the sun is vague and birds are furious, names of children float like smoke through the empty room. Ariadne, dark as sealskin, Ian, fair-skinned baby, Marina, Terence, Alex, John. After dinner, pulled back from talk of war and morals, their names glow like light around a candle. Jack, my rampant youngest son, Celia, my daughter who sings, but no children call from other rooms, no soft faces turn to kiss each guest good night or whisper that stars are a giant's eyes. There is only the slow, still wait through the opaque night for morning and more names. Thank you, Rachel Sherwood. There are, of course, the poignancies, yes, and the tragedies, like the two early losses of cherished ones. Donald Justice has this very short poem about that, on the death of friends in childhood. We shall not ever meet them bearded in heaven, nor sunning themselves among the bald of hell, if anywhere in the deserted schoolyard at twilight, forming a ring, perhaps, or joining hands in games whose very names we have forgotten. Come, memory, let us seek them there in the shadows. Thank you, Donald Justice. Denise Lowe, Two Gates. I look through glass and see a young woman of 20 washing dishes, and the window turns into a painting. She is myself 30 years ago. She holds the same blue bowls and brass teapot I still own. I see her outline against lamplight. She knows only her side of the pane. The porch where I stand is empty. Sunlight fades. I hear water run in the sink as she lowers her head, blind to the future. She does not imagine I exist. I step forward for a better look, and she dissolves into lumber and paint. A gate I pass through to the next life loses shape. Once more I stand squared into the present, among maple trees and scissor-tailed birds, in a garden, almost a mother to that faint, distant woman. Thank you, Denise. Denise Lowe. Barbara Rass has this poem, Washing the Elephant. Isn't it always the heart that wants to wash the elephant, begging the body to do it with soap and water, a ladder, hands, in tree shade big enough for the vast savannas of your sadness, the strangler fig of your guilt, the cratered full moon's light fueling the windy, spooling memory of elephant? What if Father Quinn had said, of course you'll recognize your parents in heaven, instead of being one with God will make your mother and father pointless? That was back when I was young enough to love them absolutely, though still fear for their place in heaven, imagining their souls like sponges full of something resembling street water after rain. Still, my mother sent me every Saturday to confess, to wring the sins out of my small, baffled soul. And I made up lies about lying, disobeying, chewing gum in church, to offer them as carefully as I handed over the knotted handkerchief of coins to the grocer when my mother sent me for a loaf of Wonder, Land O'Lakes, and 2 camels. If guilt is the damage of childhood, then eros is the fall of adolescence. Or the fall begins there and never ends, desire after desire parading through a lifetime like the Ringling Brothers' elephants made to walk through the Queens Midtown Tunnel and down 34th Street to the Garden. So much of our desire, like their bulky, shadowy walking after midnight, exiled from the wild and destined for a circus with its tawdry gaudiness, its unspoken pathos. It takes more than half a century to figure out who they were, the few real loves of your life, and how much of the rest, the mad, breaking heart stickiness, falls away, slowly, unnoticed, the way you lose your taste for things like popsicles unthinkingly. And though dailiness may have no place for the ones that have etched themselves in the laugh lines and frown lines on the face that's harder and harder to claim as your own, often one love of your life will appear in a dream, arriving with the weight and certitude of an elephant, and it's always the heart that wants to go out and wash the huge mysteriousness of what they meant, those memories that have only memories to feed them, and only you to keep them clean. Thank you, Barbara Rass. I spoke at the opening about jolts, and we're, of course, hearing different twists and turns of childhood, not just all the bright spots. And I was thinking of nightmares and how you would have them as a kid, as I did, and I'm sure most of us. And I had an exhibition behind the curtain that opened in the spring of 2018, and there was a character, the Beast, La Bête, who was visualized. He was one of the story characters in the theater on paper, and this is a poem about nightmares. Maybe half man, this beast that appears in dark-eyed nightmares, cauchemars, or stalks through the shadow stories children back in time read to rouse their young body minds to places of fantastical fear and fancy, where spines would deliciously tingle, but no harm would come from any man or beast, however loomingly large or wildly fierce. La Bête, the Beast. Alfred Hitchcock has this quote about fear. Fear isn't so difficult to understand. After all, weren't we all frightened as children? Nothing has changed since Little Red Riding Hood faced the big bad wolf. What frightens us today is exactly the same sort of thing that frightened us yesterday. It's just a different wolf. This fright complex is rooted in every individual. I came across an interesting bit of a story about Charles Schulz, who was the creator of the Peanuts character. And I wanted to share that with you. Charlie Brown reminded people, as no other cartoon character had, of what it was to be vulnerable, to be small and alone in the universe, to be human, both little and big, at the same time. Peanuts was about people, and by the way, I'm sorry, this is David Michaelis did this biography, Schulz and Peanuts. That's the title of that book. And he said in that, Peanuts was about people working out the interior problems of their daily lives without ever actually solving them. The absence of a solution was the center of the story. The American assumption was that children were happy and childhood was a golden time. It was adults who had problems with which they wrestled and pains that they sought to smooth. Schulz reversed the natural order of assumptions by showing that a child's pain is more intensely felt than an adult's. A child's defeats the more acutely experienced and remembered. Charlie Brown takes repeated insults from Violet and Patty about the size of his head, which they compare with a beach ball, a globe, a pie tin, the moon, a balloon, and though he may feel sorry for himself, he gets over it fast. But he does not get visibly angry. This quiet grief permeated his Peanuts. Embedded in Charlie Brown's chronic blend of desperation and optimism is a rather adult realization that, quote, being yourself is a very difficult game. Readers recognized themselves in, quote, poor moon-faced, unloved, misunderstood Charlie Brown. In his dignity, in the face of whole seasons of doomed baseball games, his endurance and stoicism, in the face of insults, he reminded people, as no other cartoon character had, of what it was to be vulnerable, to be small and alone in the universe, to be human, both little and big, at the same time. Dr. Seuss said, interestingly enough, adults are just obsolete children, and the hell with them. And Jim Henson, in It's Not Easy Being Green and Other Things to Consider, said, kids don't remember what you try to teach them. They remember what you are. Okay, moving right along. This is Rob Bresney has this anecdote that I like and thought it was fitting for us. As a boy, the renowned Spanish matador, Manolete, was a sissy. He rarely played outside, preferring to be near his mother as he read books and painted pictures. The psychologist James Hillman explains this by suggesting that the youthful Manolete had already sensed his destiny, intuiting that one day he would be alone in the ring facing down angry 2,000-pound bulls. His childhood behavior was a way of marshaling his strength and shielding him from the enormity of the challenges he would seek out one day. And Bresney asks this, is it possible that what you have considered since childhood a weakness or vulnerability has actually been preparing you to express a signature strength? Dear listeners, I'd love to hear your answers to this question. Or thoughts of note on any of our material, but not least this. Okay. Just wanted to make sure we were our sound waves were clear out to the world. This is a poem about memories. We opened with one, and something that took us back, and this is a different taking back for a different person. This is a very dear friend and mentor of mine of 40 years, Richard Russack, and he told me a little story about something that stayed with him ever since he was a boy. So I wrote a poem for him about it called Black Raspberry. The year was 1947. The place, Reno, Nevada. High summer. 2 boys from the east, visiting their way out west relatives. You and your brother Bert, sent to town with enough change jingling in your pockets to buy ice cream. At the parlor beside the casino. At sea, among the endless flavors on offer, your brother suggests black raspberry. And it was heaven, a taste you still remember, savor, 3/4 of a century later. Here's a slice of my boyhood life, very happy time when my father was still among the family, still married to my mom. And it's called The Funny Papers for my father, as my father called them. My dad at his most playful, making whimsy as I sat buoyantly, small boyishly on his lap in our sunny Sunday living room, as he played out the comic strips, read the captions, all in the characters' voices, animated in turn in funny papered words, each little made large drawing, both of us delighting in and between the lines. When the last frame came, he kept the story going, at first without me knowing, waiting till I caught his joking, and then how we would laugh together, like two Katzenjammer kids. The Funny Papers. James Baker Hall has this lovely poem about a deep-feeling place around his childhoodness, I suppose I would call it, the child. I followed the trees east at dusk. The rain has stopped, traces of fog. A few white birch on the hill slope step forth in the twilight. The woods fall in line behind them. They take what is left of the light and walk it, a white trunk at a time, toward me. The darkness comes like parents appearing behind them. It takes the thin white trees from behind, one at a time, and comes on. When it gets to me, the heavens are out, falling, and the child is gone. Fireflies cluster like stars on the dark, wet road where I run. Here's Kathleen Rain with an E, R-A-I-N-E. Childhood. I see all, am all. I leap along the line of the horizon hill. I am cloud in the high sky. I trace the veins of intricate fern. In the dark ivy wall, the wren's whirled soft to bird breast nest of round eggs is mine. Mine in the rowan tree, the blackbird's thought, in violet, in leaves ensphered. I am bird world, leaf life. I am wasp world, hung under low berry branch of hidden thorn. Moss thought, rain thought, stone still thought on the hill. Never, never, never will I go home to be a child. W.S. Merwin, One Summer. And we're coming into the last handful of things now for this time together. It is hard now to believe that we really went back that time years ago to the small town, a mile square along the beach and a little more than a century old, where I had been taken when I was a child, and nothing seemed to have changed, not the porches along the quiet streets, nor the faces on the rockers, nor the sea smell from the boardwalk at the end of the block, nor the smells from the cafeteria in a house like the others along the same sidewalk, nor the hush of the pebbled streets without cars, nor the names of the same few hotels, nor the immense clapboard auditorium to which my mother had taken me, to a performance of Aida. And you and I walked those streets in a late youth of our own, and along the boardwalk toward music we heard from the old carousel. Thank you, W.S. Merwin. Jean Murray Walker's poem, Invocation to Convince a Baby Already 12 Days Overdue to Come Out of the Womb. It's May. This is the month wild with choices. You can rush into the strolling sunshine to join forsythia bursting like popcorn, and weeping cherry, and the wood thrush whose song pulsed in Southlight this morning. Come with your hands open or shut. Come with them slippery from blood. Don't be afraid. Only slide down a cascade of water. Come with your eyes azure as pieces of sky, or come with eyes a dark complication of gray. Come trailing the leftover placenta. Come with vernix like wax over pale new cheese. Come with no clothes but the color rose, which quickens your flesh. Come skinny or fat. Come with hair black as a grand piano, shouting in 15 keys together, or come with a throat as calm as the throat of a beautiful vase. The world will fill you with sound. Come out from where you are hiding. The count is up now. The game is over. Come home to this small room. You'll be as free and as bound as the star that's framed tonight in the window above your empty crib. Thank you, Jean Murray Walker. Thank you. Levy Romero, Wood Stove of My Childhood, where potatoes cut like triangle chips were fried in manteca di Merano. Wood stove of lazy autumn smoke swirling away to nowhere. Wood stove of December, evacuating the cold chill at sunrise. Wood stove of celebration and mourning, of post-World War II Korea and Vietnam. Wood stove corner that kept vigil over drunken nodding remembrance, where uncles, primos, compadres gathered on visits from Califas. Wood stove corner with a warm ear for nostalgia, where Mama Anne stirred the atole and wrung her hands, thumb over thumb, praying for her children's children's children. Wood stove that witnessed 6 decades washing its face at the Vandeja, that saw Western swing dancing in dim lantern flame, that watched Elvis come in from across the Llano, strumming a mail-order Stella and singing in Spanish. Wood stove of the feast, lamb tied up under the crabapple tree, of early sour cherries ripening above the cornstalk horizon, of neighbors bartering a cup of sugar in exchange for mitote and conversation. Wood stove of rain tenderly pouring into the afternoon and salt sprinkling onto the patio from the mouth of the porch. Wood stove of the nighttime crackling softly, of harmonious harmonica medleys blowing before bedtime prayer. Wood stove facing John F. Kennedy's picture on the wall, of Protestant Sundays ringing without bells, of dark earth, fat worms, and acequias. Wood stove of 1960s propaganda and all the rich hippies knocking poorly at the screen door. Wood stove of private crazy laughter, of woodpeckers pecking through the rough-hewn barn timbers only to meet the sky, of rabbits nervously nibbling evening away in the arroyo, of the water bucket banging and splashing all the way home, of the water drop sizzle of buñuelos and bizcochitos and flour on the chin, of chokecherry jam dropping out from the end of a tortilla. Wood stove that heard Mentorcito's violin bringing in the new year, that saw Tio Alicio bring in an armload of wood, that heard Tio Antonio coming down the road whistling a corrido and swinging his cane. Wood stove of the blessed moontime and Grandma Juanita heating up the caldito. Wood stove of the sanctified and untamed Holy Spirit, of the dream-awake dreamers prophesying in the beginning how the end would come, of creaking trochel gates left open forever, of twisted caved-in galineros rocking in weeping April wind, of abandoned orchard waist-deep in desanimo, of teardrops that held back the laughter, of the penitente procession moving through the hills for the soul of the village, of the wounded faithful proudly concealing their scars, of armpit and bedtime giggles, of pitchforks and axes under the bed in case of intruders, of coffee cans filled with everything but coffee, of 10 cents for a cream soda at Corina's, of strawberry nehis and a bag of chili chips at Medina's, of a handful of bubble gums, Acasantos. Wood stove of genius wisdom dressed up as the village idiot, of hand-me-down stories locked away in the dispensa, of bien loco local heroes cracking home runs Saturday afternoons on La Cañada. Wood stove of all that and more, of all that disappearing as children played hide and seek in that abandoned good time feeling while stumbling on the footsteps of tradition. Wood stove that heard the fall of a people rising in silence, that died of a loneliness without cure, that cured itself in the company of the so many more lonely. Wood stove of my childhood. Thank you, Levy Romero. How about the swashbuckling adventure of Jim Hawkins and Long John Silver, Treasure Island? Robert Louis Stevenson, who had this to say about youth. Youth is the time to go flashing from one end of the world to the other, to try the manners of different nations, to hear the chimes at midnight, to see the sunrise of town and country, to be converted at a revival, to circumnavigate the metaphysics, write halting verses, run a mile to see a fire, and wait all day long in the theater to applaud Hernani. Marilyn Taylor's poem to a young diver. So long, silver sides, the lips of the sea close over you. I watch you shimmer and vanish into the inverted garden where minnows flock like sparrows and tiny pods of air sequin the powdered shoulders of the reef. Deeper, obsidian walls flicker with mystery. Fish are flame. Coral sways to the throb of the young planet in its skin. Down there, you are only a fold in the water, a mote in time. Yesterday spreads beneath you, silent as bedrock, while the future presses upward, a helix rising through Precambrian blue, brightening to gem turquoise as you break the surface, streaming gold, festooned with your tangled cargo, your frieze of stars. Thank you, Marilyn Taylor. Oscar Wilde said, "Those whom the gods love grow young." And last for now, dear listeners, for each of you,